Your old Bear books have been published as new editions. How did you adapt them to suit a new generation?
Well, being a grandmother has made me think about my readers. My little granddaughter, when she was born, that's been quite an inspiration to actually work on a new book, especially for her, really. But it's also made me think about the way that parents have to juggle their time these days. And I think that they are short of time for sitting and reading a story at bedtime. Just looking at my own son and his partner, they are both working. They have to pick up their little girl from the childminder and get home. And it means that they want to do as much reading at bedtime, but perhaps are squeezing it into a smaller amount of time. So I think that parents will still want to read lots of books to their children at bedtime, not just one. And so it makes sense for them to be slightly shorter. And because of that, I looked through my original series of books and have slightly shortened some of them, which has worked really well because it's meant that the illustrations have more space and can be bigger, so they feel more illustrated than they did before. The text is only slightly shorter, but it means that you can read them, more of them, at bedtime.
What inspired you to write your new book, Ruby Blue and Blanket?
Well, I made the characters, first of all, and I always wanted to do a book about dressing up, and I also wanted to do a book where the dressing up was more homemade. I was well aware when I went to visit schools on World Book Day, when a lot of children come into school dressed up, that many of the children were coming in Disney outfits that they'd bought, and they would be hundreds of Cinderellas and I can't think what really, but they'd be supermen by the million, and very few children were coming in anything homemade. Now I know again this is probably due to parents' lack of time, but it's such fun. Part of the dressing up for World Book Day and any other fancy dress thing is actually for the children to be involved, and I didn't feel that many of the children had been involved in their costumes at all. And I thought it would be fun to do a book where the characters dress up, but dress up in homemade things in a fairly eccentric, mad way, and really enjoy the process of dressing up. So that was the theme, the vague theme. I also wanted to make it a book that would appeal to boys and girls, not just little girls. And I wanted to avoid an over-pink book, so that the characters, the males and females, all dress up as things like princesses and cowboys, but you're not aware whether they're males or females, the characters themselves. And it was great fun. It's been a really fun book to do.
How did you decide on the book's title?
I think once I'd made the characters and given them names, that was the hardest bit, is actually choosing names for the new characters. The book is about dressing up, but to put something like Ruby Blue and Blanket in the dressing up competition or something, much too long for a title. And I decided Ruby Blue and Blanket just had a rhythm of its own, and it didn't need to have the dressing up bit in the title because it was obvious once you'd opened the book anyway what was happening, and it's nice for children to discover it later. So it just happened really, as book titles often do, and now it feels very right. I really like the rhythm of the title. It seems to fit well. So simple as that, really.
You have used rhyming text for Ruby Blue and Blanket. What made you change your usual writing style?
That's an interesting one. I'd been working on the old Bear books for many years, and with the new book and new characters, totally new characters, I needed to find a new voice. And it isn't easy when I've written not only 20 old Bear books, but also about 40 episodes of the old Bear stories for television. And it has always had to have the same rhythm, the same voice, the same amount of speech, just a pattern to it. I needed to break that pattern, and one day I just found myself writing in verse, and I found that was the key to a new voice for a new book, and it worked. It also allowed me to do completely mad things in the illustration. If you find that you're putting in bats and cats into the rhyme to fit in with the rhythm of it, it allows you to put on one page bats and cats, and that allowed me to be more eccentric in the illustrations and a bit more quirky, I think is probably the word, which has been really fun because it's allowed me to do a totally new book in a new way, in every sense, and I've really enjoyed the rhyming bit. It's fun.
You made your new characters into real toys. Is it an important part of your drawing process to see your characters three-dimensionally?
All the characters in my books are real toys, and everything in my book is always there in front of me when I'm drawing. I work in a still life way. I set up the characters and the objects in front of me and pin them in position so that I can see them and light them as required. I made the characters. I would always wanted to have a mouse in the book. I made the little mouse. I didn't knit the jumper. A friend of mine, the mother of a friend of mine, knitted the jumper for the mouse. She's very proud of that. And whoops, actually I'll pick it up. Naming them is tricky. Naming the blue rabbit, well, that was fairly straightforward. And naming Blanket the horse, who I put a blanket on, just seemed to fit and didn't take very long. Naming the mouse was a different matter because I wanted a name that wasn't too feminine or too girly. I wanted a name that would fit with the rhythm of the verse in the book. And I went through quite a few names before I came to Ruby, but because of her red jumper, Ruby seemed to fit and seemed just right and suited the character. But yes, the characters, actually the making of the characters and the way that they work together as a team visually is very important, which is why I like to make characters if I can. Can't stand it up now, yes. Yes, I think that answers that one.
When you start a new book, what comes first, the illustrations or the text?
I start with the text, but I start with the idea first, and then in my head I'm imagining the illustrations already done. So I start with a dummy book, of a tiny little thumbnail dummy book, just to work out the number of pages, or actually to work out the amount of action that's going to be needed, how many episodes that the book, for instance, with Ruby Blue and Blanket, where they were dressing up, how many different costumes, costume changes and events will be happening. Then I write the text, at least in a rough form, and then work out the illustrations in more detail, and then go back to the text while I'm doing that to fine-tune the text. So with, for instance, the rhyming text of Ruby Blue and Blanket, I started off by writing it very quickly and straight down on paper, and then found that there were a few bits that needed better rhyming or more interesting or less predictable perhaps, and so I fiddled with that for quite a long while, but while I was carrying on with the drawing, because the drawing was already sorted then, I knew what I was going to put into it, and I'd done an illustrated dummy book to show exactly what would be on each page, and counting the pages is critical.
What was the hardest part of writing and illustrating Ruby Blue and Blanket?
Surprisingly, it was my own choice of fabrics that was the hardest part. When I made the characters are here in front of me, I chose fabrics, knitting, a tartan weave, things that were actually turned out to be really difficult to draw. A challenge, I think, but on reflection I perhaps shouldn't have. I could have had a plain blanket on Blanket the horse. I didn't have to have spotty trousers on the rabbit, and I didn't have to have knitting. All of those take a lot of time, but on the other hand, I think people appreciate the effort that you've put into your drawing. I hope they do anyway, because they were certainly the most tricky bits, all the bits that slowed me down. The rest, it's a doddle.
What is your normal working day?
A normal book, I probably would fit in a few hours in the morning, a few hours in the afternoon, and quite a few hours in the evening when there are no distractions. When I was working on Ruby Blue and Blanket, I was aware of tight deadline, and I worked crazy hours on it, and actually managed to do things like 15-hour days and things, just drawing, interspersed with the odd walk, just to keep your circulation going. But I haven't worked at that pace for quite a long time. When I worked on the Old Bear books, my children were young, and I tended to work at night, so I got into a habit then of working either when they were asleep or at school or in the evening. But I hadn't really worked quite like that until this book, which was fine. I got it done, and I was really, really pleased to do it. And I really was enjoying myself while doing the drawing, so it was a labour of love.
What do you enjoy doing best when you're not working on a book?
I love gardening. We've got a big garden here, and there's always a lot to do. We grow all our own firewood. We have a vegetable patch, so we grow a lot of our own vegetables and lots of fruit trees. So there's always plenty to do. I don't do small flower gardening, but big bramble gardening. And I love cooking. I like cooking the things that we grow here, but I really love cooking generally. So could happily do that all the time, and I'd probably have been a gardener if I hadn't been an illustrator.
Your new book will be published in February. Tell me about the exhibition planned to accompany the book launch.
The exhibition where the book is going to be launched is at the Illustration Cupboard in Berry Street in London, which is near Green Park, near the Royal Academy. It's a really nice little gallery, and all the artwork will be exhibited there, the artwork for the book. And the launch, the book is being printed, published by Scribblers, which is an imprint of Salariya books, and the publication date is the 27th of February, and the launch exhibition begins, I think, on the 25th of February at the Illustration Cupboard and continues until the 16th of March, so plenty of time there, and all the artwork will be on display then.